All right, hello everybody. Let me push this back. Welcome. We're going to be reading Evelyn Underhill's book. Mysticism, studying the nature and development of spiritual consciousness. And she is an Anglican, and so she's coming from a Christian perspective, but she's really good at studying it in all different kinds of disciplines and in a very safe but beautiful way. And so my name is Dr. Cheryl Meyer. I am a psychologist, and I hope this extra noise isn't going to be distracting us, but it just is what it is. I'm not at my regular spot because there's a bunch of tractors over there. They're doing some kind of cleaning up on the trails. And so I have this set up and I'll begin. I have this 1 hour, and so I'm like, I got to start now. Welcome if you're on the podcast. This is, I think, the 53rd hour we are into this, but just welcome where you are. Trust you are. This chapter is on the dark night of the soul. And so that's the ocean behind me. I'm going to just let her speak. All right. This book is from 1910, so it's free copyright. That's why one of the reasons, I don't know why I'm called to all of these books. I know that my passion is to equip people in your spiritual walk, in your spiritual development, so that, equip you with all of the things I wish I had. And I was going to read this myself, and I just decided to share it with everybody so that you have it too, because I trusted that if it's showing up on my spiritual path, and there's like thousands of books I have in my house, and so that this one showed up, and that I just trust that other people can be equipped by it as well. And I didn't see it in Audible anywhere. And so I just was like, I'll read it for us then. And that's where this came about. And now I'm a psychologist for the past 20 plus years, and it took me 9 years to get my doctorate, an undergrad and doctorate. So sometimes I will say things, but I don't want my opinion to show up here. Just if I've learned something on this path that can help us. And, I apologize if I've said too much and where I've said too little in areas where I could have expounded more. I'll just go back to the book now, right? In order to raise the soul from imperfection, we were in the middle of this paragraph, but I'm going to read part of this paragraph again. In order to raise, again, this is on the dark night of the soul. Whenever I do technical things, I encourage you to just say a prayer. In all of my old ones, if you ever re-listen to this, so from going forward and going backwards to any of those, if I'm having technical difficulties, please pray for me. Pray for all of these videos. Pray for all the people coming to this. This morning when I was on my hike up here, I was like, gosh, if people only knew, like, the difficulties each of us face, and that if one person was praying for us today, it's like if you were on a really steep hill and your parents came by and swung you up, and you got to hang on their arms for like 10 feet. It might help you go through the next 10 miles because you had that one help. This is what prayers are like. That's just one analogy or picture of what prayers are like. So make sure to pray for other people, and pray that the right people, I pray, God, right now, that the right people will come to this video and be equipped by it, exactly what they need today and what they need for the rest of their spiritual walk. I pray that this gets shared to the right people. And so do your part. We're all part of a body, and this isn't a guilt trip. This is my encouragement. I just know how difficult this path can be, and how much we all help each other. Anyway, all right, I'll keep going. In order to raise the soul from imperfection, said the voice of God to Saint Catherine. I love that, right? God is living in our hearts and lives. He's going to speak into our heart. So it says that there's a verse, my sheep hear my voice, and they will not follow another. In order to raise the soul from imperfection, said the voice of God to Saint Catherine in her dialogue, I withdraw myself from her sentiment, depriving her of former consolations, which I do in order to humiliate her and cause her to seek me in truth and to prove her in the light of faith, so that she come to prudence. Then, if she love me without thought of self, and with lively faith, and with hatred of her own sensuality, she rejoices in the time of trouble, deeming herself unworthy of peace and quietness of mind. Now comes the second of the three things of which I told thee. That is to say, how the soul arrives at perfection, and what she does when she is perfect. That is what she does. Though she perceives that I have withdrawn myself, she does not on that account look back, but perseveres with humility in her exercises, remaining barred in the house of self-knowledge, and continuing to dwell therein, awaits with lively faith the coming of the Holy Spirit, that is, of me, with a capital M, right? Who am the fire of love, ellipsis. This is what the soul does in order to rise from imperfection and arrive at perfection. And it is to this end, namely, that she may arrive at perfection, that I withdraw from her, not by grace, but by sentiment. So his grace is not withdrawn, but all the sentimentality or feelings of consolation, or everyone saying, hey, you're doing a great job. Sometimes that's going to be withdrawn from us. Anyway, I'll let her talk more. Once more do I leave her, so that she may see and know her defects, so that feeling herself deprived of consolation and afflicted by pain, she may recognize her own weakness and learn how incapable she is of stability or perseverance, thus cutting down to the very root of spiritual self-love. For this should be the end and purpose of all her self-knowledge, to rise above herself, mounting the throne of conscience, and not permitting the sentiment of imperfect love to turn again in its death struggle, but with correction and reproof, digging up the root of self-love with the knife of self-hatred and the love of virtue. Wow. I pray you understand what she's saying, and you can re-listen to that if you need to, or just keep asking God. God is able to illuminate your mind and your heart and your soul and your will with all of these truths. This is why we pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on this earth. We were made out of earth, and God breathed a soul into Adam and Eve, right? And so it's just like, anyway. Digging up the root of self-love with the knife of self-hatred. Here we see the mystical reason of that bitter self-contempt and sense of helplessness which overwhelms the soul in the dark night. Such a sense of helplessness is really, the mystics say, a mark of progress, of deeper initiation into that sphere of reality to which it is not yet acclimated, and which brings with it a growing consciousness of the appalling disparity between that reality, that perfection, and the imperfect soul. The self is in the dark because it is blinded by a light greater than it can bear. The more clear the light, the more it does blind the eyes of the owl. And the stronger the sun's rays, the more it blinds the visual organs, overcoming them by reason of their weakness, and depriving them of the power of seeing. So the divine light of contemplation, when it beats on the soul, not yet perfectly enlightened, causes spiritual darkness, not only because it surpasses its strength, but because it blinds it and deprives it of its natural perceptions. As eyes weakened and clouded by humors suffer pain when the clear light beats upon them, so the soul, by reason of its impurity, suffers exceedingly when the divine light really shines upon it. And when the rays of this pure light shine upon the soul, in order to expel its impurities, the soul perceives itself to be so unclean and miserable that it seems as if God had set himself against it, and itself were set against God. Ellipsis. Wonderful and piteous sight. So great are the weaknesses and impurity of the soul that the hand of God, so soft and gentle, is felt to be so heavy and oppressive, though neither pressing nor resting on it, but merely touching it. And that too most mercifully, for he touches the soul not to chastise it, but to load it with his graces. Wow. And so I was going to say, in those times of pause, you can choose to be deeply present, or also pray for others who are on this spiritual path. If you're drawn to these kinds of videos, most likely it's because, I honor you. I honor you as a fellow traveler on this path. I wish you much love. Let's keep being equipped. The dark night, then, whichever way we look at it, is a state of disharmony, of imperfect adaptation to environment, the self unaccustomed to that direct contact of the absolute, which is destined to become the source of its vitality and its joy, feels the, quote, soft and gentle touch of the following love as unbearable in its weight. It reminds me of the Hound of Heaven. And I put that on my channel. You can listen to it. He says, fear was to evade as love was to pursue. It's like, is this hand that took everything from me, is it just your hand that wanted to give it back to me in a different way? Anyway, which is destined to become the source of its vitality and its joy, feels the soft and gentle touch of the following love as unbearable in its weight. The self-knotting, Naughting, right? Or purification of the will, which here takes place, is the struggle to resolve that disharmony, to purge away the somewhat, which still sets itself up in the soul as separate from the divine, and makes the clear light of reality a torment instead of a joy. So deeply has the soul now entered into the great stream of spiritual life, so dominant has her transcendental faculty become, that this process is accomplished in her whether she will or not or no. Oh, thank God. And in this sense, it is, as ascetic writers sometimes call it, a passive purgation. So long as the subject still feels himself to be somewhat, and that some part of that was from St. John of the Cross. It's saying, the night escura del alma, is alma your soul or blood? In Spanish, Espanol, of blood. Anyway. So it says, as ascetic writers sometimes call it, is a, quote, passive purgation. So long as the subject still feels himself to be somewhat, he has not yet annihilated selfhood and come to that ground where his being can be united with the being of God. I just did a 1-minute short on that. I was remixing someone else saying you have to die first. And I was quoting that verse that Jesus said, a seed has to go into the ground. The outer shell has to come out in order for the plant to grow. Otherwise, it's not going to grow. It just stays in the seed and thinks, look, I'm a Christian. And it's like, you're meant to bear fruit. That means God, God's doing this in you. And I just pray, God, do this in us. Help us give our wills over to you. Has not yet annihilated selfhood and come to that ground where his being can be united with the being of God. Only when he learns to cease thinking of himself at all, in however depreciatory a sense, when he abolishes even such selfhood as lies in a desire for the sensible presence of God, will the harmony be attained. This is the, quote, knotting of the soul, not, Naught. It's your letting it be not. Anyway, It's an old English word. She wrote this in 1910, so we knew more about it back then. This is the knotting of the soul, the utter surrender to the great movement of the absolute life, which is insisted upon at such length by all writers upon mysticism. Here, as in the purgation, the condition of access to higher levels of vitality is a death, a deprivation, a detachment, a clearing of the ground. Poverty leaps to the cross and finds there an utter desolation without promise of spiritual reward. The satisfactions of the spirit must now go the same way as the satisfaction of the senses. Even the power of voluntary sacrifice and self-discipline is taken away. A dreadful Enui. I forgot what language that is. A dull helplessness takes its place. The mystic motto, I am nothing, I have nothing, I desire nothing, must now express not only the detachment of the senses, but the whole being's surrender to the all. The moral condition towards which the interior travail is directed is that of an utter humility. Everything depends, says Tauler, on a fathomless sinking into a fathomless nothingness. He continues, if a man were to say, Lord, who art thou that I must follow thee through such deep, gloomy, miserable paths? The Lord would reply, I am God and man and far more God. If a man could answer then, really and consciously from the bottom of his heart, then I am nothing and less than nothing, all would be accomplished, for the Godhead has really no place to work in but ground, where all has been annihilated. You know, Jesus said, some seed falls on the fertile ground. Well, she's talking about how this ground is fertile. And I was looking, when I was talking to you guys, at this little seedling actually on the ground. It's just this little plant that's coming up like this. Maybe I can show at the end. I don't want to move my camera because then we might have to start the setup all over. It's, anyway. As the schoolmen say, when a new form is to come into existence, the old must of necessity be destroyed. And so I say, if a man is to be thus clothed upon with this being, with a capital B, right? All the forms must of necessity be done away that were ever received by him in all his powers of perception, knowledge, will, work, of subjection, sensibility, and self-seeking. When St. Paul saw nothing, he saw God. You know, he was blinded on the road. So also when Elias, is that Elias? Is Elisha or Elijah? Or Elias, I don't know, I'll just leave it at that. Wrapped his face in his mantle, God came. All strong rocks are broken here. All on which the spirit can rest must be done away. Then, when all forms have ceased to exist, in the twinkling of an eye, the man is transformed. Therefore, thou must make an entrance. Thereupon speaks the Heavenly Father to him. Thou shalt call me Father, and shalt never cease to enter in, entering ever further in, ever nearer, so as to sink the deeper in an unknown and unnamed abyss. And above all ways, images and forms, above all powers, to lose thyself, deny thyself, and even unform thyself. End quote. In this lost condition, nothing is to be seen but a ground which rests upon itself, everywhere, one being, one life. It is thus, man may say, that he becomes unknowing, unloving, and senseless. Well, that's the end of the quote. I guess there's quotes within this quote. Anyway. All right, it just is what it is. It is clear that so drastic a process of unselfing is not likely to take place without stress. You have to keep asking God, how – here's my stress so that you're not locked in the worry. That's my little side note. It is the negative aspect of deification, in which the self, deprived of perception, knowledge, will, work, and self-seeking, the I, the me, the mine, loses itself, denies itself, unforms itself, drawing ever nearer to the one, with a capital O, one, till, quote, nothing is to be seen but a ground which rests upon itself. It's not, it's not resting upon, anyway, she'll explain it. The ground of the soul in which it has union with God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, will, and strength. Right? Everywhere, one being, one life. This is the goal of mystical activity. That's so funny, because I was just like, we can take the background noise. It's a bunch of tractors and stuff, tilling up the ground. That's just our notification in this video. What's going on? It's like we can either be distracted and annoyed by that, or we can just be like, this is what's going on. Let's keep focusing on our task and on being willing ground for God as best we can. And he'll do all of it. He'll do all of it. It's like, work out your faith with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and act according to his will. It's like he does all of it, and then it's like, but you do it. You do your part. Ask God to give you wisdom on that, right? Ask God to give me wisdom on that. God, I pray for your wisdom. Union with God, the ground of the soul in which it has union with God. Everywhere, one being, one life. This is the goal of mystical activity, the final state of equilibrium towards which the self is moving, or rather struggling, in the dimness and anguish of the dark night. The soul, says Madame Guyon, is a passage of unusual beauty. After many a redoubled death, expires at last into the arms of love, with a capital L. But she is unable to perceive these arms. Then reduced to naught, there is found in her ashes, a seed of immortality, which is preserved in these ashes, and will germinate in its season. But she knows not this, and does not expect ever to see herself living again. Moreover, the soul which is reduced to the nothing ought to dwell therein without wishing, since she is now but dust, to issue from the state, nor as before desiring to live again. She must remain as something which no longer exists, and this in order that the torrent may drown itself and lose itself in the sea. The sea? There's the ocean right there. Never to find itself in its selfhood again, that it may become one and the same thing with the sea. It just reminds me so much of Ash Wednesday, ashes to ashes, dust to dust from ashes. Anyway, God will give you glory for ashes. What does it say? Something for ashes, beauty for ashes. That's the verse in the Old. A prophet said this, right? You let yourself be in the ashes that he wants you to be, not by self-humiliating yourself in a, like, I'm going to keep putting myself down. C.S. Lewis says humility is not thinking about yourself like destructively. It's like you're just not thinking of yourself as much. I don't know. Thinking less of yourself. Not thinking less of yourself, but thinking less of yourself. Something like that. You can look up the quote. Thinking of yourself less. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Anyway, because when you let yourself just be in this state, you keep trusting that God will make something out of that. Ask God what stage you're in. You might not be in this stage, but it might be equipping you for a stage in the future, or helping you see what stage you were in the past. So Hilton says of the knotted soul, the less that it thinketh that it loveth or seeth God, the nearer it, what is this word? It nigheth, it's near, nigheth, for to perceive the gift of this blessed love, for then is love master, and worketh in the soul, and maketh it forget itself, and for to see and look on only how love worketh, and then is the soul more suffering than doing, and that is pure love. The less, I'm going to read that back again, of the knotted soul, the less it thinketh that it loveth or seeth God, the nearer it nigheth, for to perceive the gift of this blessed love. For then is love master, and worketh in the soul, and maketh it forget itself, and for to see and look on only how love worketh. And then is the soul more suffering than doing, and that is pure love. The mystic death or dark night is therefore an aspect or incident of the self's self-loss in the abyss of the divine life, of that mergence and union of the soul with the absolute, which is the whole object of the mystical evolution of man. It is the last painful break with the life of illusion, the tearing away of the self from that word of becoming. A block. Morning. In which, from that world of becoming, in which all its natural affections and desires are rooted, to which its intellect and senses correspond, and the thrusting of it into that world of being, where at first weak and blinded, it can but find a wilderness, a dark. No transmutation without fire, says the alchemist. No cross, no crown, says the Christian. I bear the cross while he prepares my crown. There's a hymn that says that someone taught me. Or I bear the cross while I wear the crown. I think that's how it goes. Christ was wearing his crown as he was being crucified. You know, they were trying to mock him, and yet he was wearing the crown, and it said over his head, King. And it spoke true. And Pilate said, what I've written. Even though he was betraying him to death, he did that part. God will use all of the bad. I have to trust that and turn it into good. He is above all of that. He is like the master chessman that's playing moves above everybody else. God works all for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, to will and to work according to his will. Something like that. You can write these verses as they really are. I'm just in the wilderness reading this. If I don't remember them exactly, then write them in the comments. Or write them in your own journal, but write them in the comments so other people can grow by that. If you'd like. I'm always like, do something to contribute. All of us must. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm acting on this wanting that I don't have this just for myself. All right. I pray God that develop that in you. I'm sure it's already developed in you. All right. Everything that he gives, be generous. Have an open hand that it goes to other people. The mystic death or dark night is therefore an aspect or incident of the self's self-loss in the abyss of the divine life, of that mergence and union of the soul with the absolute, which is the whole object of the mystical evolution of man. It is the last painful break with the life of illusion, the tearing away of the self from the word of becoming. I hope I wasn't in that shot. I heard the bikers coming, and I made a little video right before this, and there's a jump that goes right to where I'm sitting, but I'd never seen it before because I'm not in my normal spot, but it's okay for us not to be in the normal spot. Oh shoot. That's okay. All right. Okay. At first weak and blinded, it can but find a wilderness, a dark. No transmutation without fire, says the alchemist. No cross, no crown, says the Christian. All the great experts of the spiritual life agree, whatever be their creeds, their symbols, their explanation, in describing the stress, tribulation, and loneliness as an essential part of the way from the many to the one. The dark night then brings the self to the threshold of that completed life, which is to be lived in intimate union with reality. It is the entombment which precedes the resurrection, says the Christian mystics, ever ready to describe their life process in the language of their faith. Here, as elsewhere, but nowhere else in so drastic a sense, the self must, quote, lose to find and die to live. I was lost, but now I'm found, right? Amazing Grace. My friend Elliott Smith has a song called Hanging Around in the Lost and Found, because you're dying to your old self, so you're hanging to your old self. We were friends. We didn't get to talk about that one line, but we were talking about that theme all of the time. You're dying to your old self together with others who are on the spiritual path, hanging around in the lost and found. You're found by God, but lost, the world thinks you're an idiot. Even in the church, they think you're an idiot and they persecute you. So don't be afraid if you're persecuted in the church. I'm not saying to look for that, and I'm not saying to stay stuck in a victim position, but they persecuted St. John of the Cross. I just heard about it yesterday from one of my spiritual friends. I forgot about that. They had put him, she said, now I have to look this up again, that they put him, he's the doctor of detachment, the one who came up with the term dark night of the soul, I think. Now, it's all through the scriptures, though. It's just not named that term, but they would beat him publicly in the monastery, whatever he was part of, to punish him and to show everybody what a bad person and a bad path he was on. And he was there creating this path for us in God, following the will of God, you know, being mortified in such a horrible way and by the church, right? And so I'm not saying to turn against the church. I'm saying God first. I just was like, I don't know who needs to hear that. I know I do. And we're not meant to go to even sleep in bitterness. So I hope and I pray that St. John of the Cross didn't do that. He got through that in order to write us the ascent of Mount Carmel and the living flame of love. And what I was seeing on my way up here, on my walk up here, was actually in the Count of Monte Cristo, the movie, the more recent movie, the actor, I won't say his name, but the actor, it's like he's beaten every year in the prison that he's wrongfully in. He's beaten every year. But once he finds the professor who starts teaching him how to read and how to do sorting, you know, and how to learn Italiano and all these different languages and everything, right? Once he does that, the guys come and they're beating him and he's speaking in Italian while they're beating him. You know, it's quite profound. And it was just like, I was going up a hill that was usually taking me out of breath, and I didn't even notice that I was going up the steepest hill. I was like, oh, this is the steepest hill on this trail, because you just keep training in God and look at what God can equip you with and count on you for. Once you have this training where you are detached, then people can't buy you out, and you won't sell out for stupid things, for less than things. You won't sell out to try to be popular, because you depended on God in the most utter and complete rejection, where everyone that you have loved, it feels like, has rejected you completely, and you're left alone and going, wait, what did I do? And it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. I mean, you can ask God for forgiveness for whatever you have done, but it's God's making fertile soil so that those seeds can grow. Some landed on fertile soil. Some people went off to the wayside. Some got plucked up by the birds. understand what Jesus is saying in those parables. The dark night then brings the self to the threshold of that completed life, which is to be lived in an intimate union with reality, with a capital R. It is the entombment which precedes the resurrection, says the Christian mystics, ever ready to describe their life process in the language of their faith. Here, as elsewhere, but nowhere else, is so drastic a sense. The self must lose to find and die to live. The dark night, as we have seen, tends to establish itself gradually, the powers and intuitions of the self being withdrawn one after another. The intervals of lucidity become rarer until the mystic death or state of total deprivation is reached. So too, when the night begins to break down before the advance of the new or unitive life, this process is generally slow, though it may be marked, as for instance in Ruhlmann Merswin's case, by visions and ecstasies. One after another, the miseries and disharmonies of the dark night give way. Affirmations take the place of negation. The cloud of unknowing is pierced by rays of light. Quote, when the old state of deprivation has reached its term. A guy that I made the 1-minute video of yesterday was saying, when you come to the end of yourself, that's when God takes you off, all right? I'm like, please just let me get to the end of myself already, right? God's patient with us, and God's patient in his work in us. God is beyond he and she. See Psalm 27. When my mother and father forsake me, the Lord, the I am, picks me up. Oh, I'm just feeling so strong in my heart, like, do not be deceived. Like, there's going to be, and there already are deceptions in our world, and so be grounded in the truth so that you will not be deceived by them. When the old state of deprivation has reached its term, says Madame Guyon, this dead self feels little by little, yet without feeling, that its ashes revive and take a new life. But this happens so gradually that it seems to her that it is but a fancy or a sleep in which one has had a happy dream, ellipsis. And in this consists the last degree, which is the beginning of the divine and truly interior life, which contains an infinite number of degrees, and wherein one may always go forward without end, even as this torrent can always go forward in the sea and take therefrom and more qualities, the longer it sojourns there. The act of utter surrender, then, which is produced by the dark night, has given the self its footing in eternity. The abandonment of the old centers of consciousness has permitted movement towards the new. In each such forward movement, the transcendental self, that spark of the soul which is united to the absolute life, has invaded more and more the seat of personality, advanced in that unresting process which involves the remaking of the self in conformity with the eternal world. In the misery and apparent stagnation of the dark night, in that dimness of the spiritual consciousness, that dullness of its will and love, work has been done, and the last great stage of the inward transmutation accomplished. The self which comes forth from the night is no separated self, conscious of the illumination of the uncreated light, but the new man, the transmuted humanity, whose life is one with the absolute life of God. The instant the two houses of the soul, the sensual and the spiritual, are tranquil and confirmed, says St. John of the Cross, with the whole household of its powers and desires sunk in sleep and silence, as to all things of heaven and earth, the divine wisdom immediately in a new bond of loving possession unites itself to the soul, and that is fulfilled which is written, while quiet silence contained all things, and the night was in the midway of her course, thy omnipotent word sallied out of the heaven from the royal seats. That's wisdom, the book of wisdom, chapter XVIII, so that's 18, verse 14. The same truth is set before us in the canticle, where the bride, after passing by those who took her veil away and wounded her, saith, when I had a little passed by them, I found him whom my soul loveth. when I had just a little passed by them, right? Those people who took her veil. That's from Night Oscura, Noche Oscura del Alma, again, from St. John of the Cross. And whatever that is in English. You can look it up. Or write it in the comments for us if you speak Spanish. Anyway, so far we have considered the dark night of the soul from a somewhat academic point of view. We have tried to dissect and describe it, have seen it through... I'm going to lower this. See, the mic is right here. That's why I'm trying to talk so close to the mic, because I didn't bring mine this time. We have tried to dissect and describe it, have seen it through the medium of literature rather than of life. Such a proceeding has obvious disadvantages when dealing with any organic process, and in its application to the spiritual life of man, these disadvantages are increased. Moreover, our chief example from the life, Madame Guyon, valuable as her passion for self-analysis makes her to the student of mystic states, cannot be looked upon as a wholly satisfactory witness. Her morbid sentimentalism, her absurd, quote, spiritual self-importance has to be taken into account and constantly remembered in estimating the value of her psychological descriptions. If we want to get a true objective idea of the dark night, we must see it in its wholeness as a part of the general life process, not as a departmental experience. We must study the reactions of a self which is passing through this stage of development upon its normal environment, the content of its diurnal existence, like the dark, not only on its intuition of the divine. Okay, so it's kind of like a musician might experience the dark night differently than an accountant, or than, someone who's working on a cruise or something. Everybody has your different temperaments and different way. God is doing the same movement in each of our souls, but it comes at different stages, different times, and it will look different ways. So these are just landmarks or pointers. As a pendant to this chapter, then we will look at the state of pain as it has expressed itself in the life of a mystic whose ardent, impressionable, and poetic nature reacted to every aspect of the contemplative experience, every mood and fluctuation of the soul. I choose this particular case, the case of Suso, the case of Dr. Cheryl Meyer. Like, if you know, I have 1,000 videos, and so many of them I'm just crying in the middle of them, and sometimes really happy and elated, and sometimes I'm here, and that's it. I'm here and I'm showing up. Anyway, so you can see these as I'm doing all these teachings and these videos. If you want an example in video, now we have video, of people, or you're hearing my voice, of people who have been going through this, who you can see God is working in this person. So just forgive our faults and look past them and look at them in the whole context of what God is doing in each of our lives. I was praying that prayer that St. Ignatius taught. It's in the exercises of St. Ignatius, but I can't remember if he wrote it, but it says, I give you, God, all of my memories, my understanding, my liberties, and my entire will. You have given all to me. I give it all back to you. I only ask your love and your grace. So in this moment, you can give all of your past mistakes. Forgive us, God, this moment, as we are actively forgiving. We give you all the debts of other people. You can start over right now. As a pendant to this chapter, we will look at the state of pain as it expressed itself here. She chose Suso. 1, because it contains many interesting and unconventional elements, showing us the dark night, not as a series of specific events, but as a stage of development largely conditioned by individual temperament. Oh, so she was going to say that anyway. 2, because being described to us at first hand in the pages of his singularly ingenious autobiography, it is comparatively free from the reverent and corrupting emendations of the hagiographer. So someone else writing his life, right? Suso's life, from the 22nd chapter onwards, is one of the most valuable documents which we possess for the study of this period of the mystic way. We see it more clearly, perhaps, than its author can have done, the remaking of his consciousness, his temperamental reactions to the ceaseless and inexorable travail of his deeper self, so different in type from those of Madame Guyon and Saint Teresa, Saint Teresa of Avila. There is a note of virile activity about these trials and purifications, an insistence upon the heroic aspect of the spiritual life, which most of us find far more sympathetic than Madame Guyon's elaborate discourses on resignation and holy passivity, or even St. Teresa's dark ecstasies of insatiable desire, right? This hero path. Oh my gosh, that just reminds me. Where was I? I was in a store, and my heart was like, it was the Holy Spirit in my heart said, I want you to take note of the next song that's going to play. I was in a store called Trader Joe's. I was just getting groceries. And I was like, I think that's where I was. I think that's where I was. Anyway, there was a song already playing. There's this Jason Mraz song playing when I came in, and it was like, open up your plans and now you're free, right? You give everything to God. You're like, and I was already, my heart was like, pay attention to this song. And then it was like, and I want you to pay attention to the next song. But the next song was, I Can Be Your Hero, Oh, no. No, it's not I Can Be Your Hero. It has hero. It's from the movie Footloose. It was like, we're holding out for a hero till the end of the night. You've got to be strong, and you've got to be good. You've got to be strong for this fight. I almost started crying in the middle of Trader Joe's, because this is how God can speak to us. Now, Evelyn Underhill is talking about this heroic path, and we're called on this heroic path. So some of us can relate to it more because God's been speaking to us about this hero's path, just like Joseph Campbell talks some about the hero's journey. Now, I'm not saying get caught back up in that. We don't have to study all this stuff so much that we don't go on this path because we're stuck in a room studying it, That's what God's been showing me. But anyway, the chapter in which Suso's entrance into this second mystic life of deprivation is described is called How the Servitor Was Led into the School of True Resignation, with a capital T and R, true resignation, well, capital S too, School of True Resignation. Characteristically, this inward experience expressed itself in a series of dramatic visions of that, quote, dynamic kind, which we have noticed as a common accompaniment of the crisis in which the mystical self moves to a new level of consciousness. I can't remember. I think that was the day before yesterday when that song was playing. I was getting groceries because, anyway, it followed the long period of constant mortification and intermittent illumination, which lasted, as he tells us, from his 18th to his 40th year. Please, God, no. I say that God worked in their consciousness for us. It's like we're standing on all of that was built in their consciousness. That's why we're all one body, is like what they have done comes to us. So hopefully it doesn't have to take from our 18th to 40th year. And constituted the first cycle of his spiritual life. At the end of that time, God showed him that all of this severity and these penances were but a good beginning, and that by these he had triumphed over the unruly sensual man, but that now he must exert himself in another manner if he desired to advance in the way, capital W, way. Christianity was first called the way, and Jesus was saying, I am the way. He's showing us the way, and he is the way. And I think, if you read Mere Christianity, he says C.S. Lewis says that some people that are Buddhists are being taught in this way, and they're not yet calling themselves Christians. I'm not saying Buddhism is that. I'm saying, and he said some people that are Christians are falling off the way, and they're still calling themselves by the name of Christians. Now, I don't want anyone to be afraid by that. You can look up the quote itself. Look up the whole chapter in the whole book. It's Mere Christianity. It's free in Canada. But anyway, people can get it at libraries or borrow it from someone or something. If two of these, so when we're walking on that way, we're walking on the path Christ is and Christ lived and Christ, if all of the world was created by the word, the logos, then all of this, I won't get too generalistic anyway. In God, we live and move and have our being. In two of these visions, these vivid interior dramas, we seem to see Suso's developed mystical consciousness running ahead of its experience, reading the hidden book of its own future, probing its own spiritual necessities, and presenting the results to the backward and unwilling surface mind. We have our surface mind that's going the other direction, that would go along with the people and flog St. John of the Cross in front of the whole community to shame him, So there's part of us that God is working out. And so, I've seen that in my own life, is that if I kept doubting where God was taking me, I would be around other Christian people and they would start expressing their doubt, and they're just communicating what I haven't surrendered to God as well. And so we can blame them, or we can go, wait, maybe God is purifying that part in me as well that would beat me for going against the programming of my childhood that says, don't bite the hand that feeds you, you're going to die. And Jesus says, no, you must leave your mother and father to follow me. Like, if they're not going on this path, you got to leave them. You got to let go of everything. Ask God what that means for you. But, I don't ever want to lead anyone astray. Jesus said the road is narrow and few find it, right? So, how hard it is for the rich man, the person who's rich in their own egotism, in their own education, in their own all of this stuff, to enter into the kingdom of God. Now, with man, that's impossible. But Jesus said, with God, all things are possible, right? Because the disciples were like, then how can anyone be saved? Because we're so attached to these things, right? And so she's like, Evelyn Underhill's writing, and presenting the results to the backward and unwilling surface mind. This growing mystic consciousness is already aware of fetters which the normal Suso does not feel. Its eyes open upon the soul's true country, it sees the path which it must tread to perfect freedom. The difference between the quality of that freedom and the spirituality which Suso thinks that he has attained. The first of these visions is that of the upper school. The second is that in which he is called to put upon him the armor of a knight. Okay, I kept thinking of the armor of God on the way here. The helmet of salvation. Be sure of your true salvation, the breastplate of righteousness. This is in Ephesians 6, I think. The belt of truth, the shield of faith, that all of the fiery darts of the enemy are warded off with the shield of faith. You're meant to put on the full armor of God every day and live with this armor on. It's kind of like, I'm getting a picture of Frodo, who, when Bilbo gave him the mithril, that he wore underneath his clothes, this mithril thing that a spear couldn't go through. It kept him alive. Okay, one night after matins, this is a quote from Suso, I think. One night after matins, the servitor became seated in his chair and plunged in deep thought. He was rapt from his senses, and it seemed to him that he saw in a vision a magnificent young man descended from heaven before him and say, "Thou hast been long enough in the lower school, and hast there sufficiently applied thyself. Come then with me, and I will introduce thee into the highest school that exists in this world. There thou shalt apply thyself to the study of that science which will procure thee the veritable peace of God, and which will bring thy holy beginning to a happy end. Then the servitor rose full of joy, and it seemed to him that the young man took him by the hand and led him into a spiritual country, wherein there was a fair house inhabited by spiritual men, for here lived those who applied themselves to the study of this science. As soon as he entered it, these received him kindly and amiably, saluted him, and at once they went to the Supreme Master and told him that a man was come who desired to be his disciple and to learn his science. And he said, "Let him come before me, and I may see whether he please me." And when the Supreme Master saw the servitor, he smiled on him very kindly and said, "Know that this guest is able to become a good disciple of our high science, if he will bear with patience the hard probation, for it is necessary that he be tried inwardly." End quote. The servitor did not then understand these enigmatic words. Here, there's another quote. He turned toward the young man who had brought him and asked, "Well, my dear comrade, what then is this upper school and this science of which you have spoken to me?" The young man replied thus, "In this upper school they teach the science of perfect self-abandonment. That is to say, that a man is here taught to renounce himself so utterly that in all those circumstances in which God is manifested, either by himself or in his creatures, the man applies himself only to remaining calm and unmoved, renouncing so far as is possible all human frailty." End quote. And she's talking about, these were common in a group called Friends of God, appear frequently in their work. And she's also talking about the life Vita Supera from Rulman Merswin's Vision of the Nine Rocks, where the man who has gazed upon his origin is to have been in the upper school of the Holy Spirit, to have been united to God. Now, that's the footnotes. But this is also in my commentary from Blessed Theophylact in the end of Luke, where Jesus tells John and Peter, John is the mystic approach, Peter's like the physical of the church, to go prepare the upper room. Furnished means smoothed out upper room, and he's talking about this upper school as well. Anyway, and shortly after this discourse, the servitor came to himself, and talking to himself, he said, "Examine thyself inwardly, and thou wilt see that thou hast still much self-will. Thou wilt observe that with all thy mortifications which thou hast inflicted on thyself, thou canst not yet endure external vexations. Thou art like a hare." I kept seeing all these bunnies on the way up here, "hiding in a bush, who is frightened by the whispering of the leaves. Thou also art frightened every day by the griefs that come to thee. Thou dost turn pale at the sight of those who speak against thee." God help us. "When thou dost fear to succumb, thou takest flight. When thou oughtest to present thyself with simplicity, thou dost hide thyself. When they praise thee, thou art happy. When they blame thee, thou art sad. Truly, it is very needful for thee that thou shouldst go to an upper school." Some weeks later, that's the end quote, when he had been rejoicing in the new bodily comfort which resulted from his relinquishment of all outward mortifications, Suso received a still more pointed lesson on his need of moral courage. He was sitting on his bed and meditating on the words of Job, "Militia est." I don't know what that is in the book of Job. Militiaeast. Well, maybe she'll say, "The life of man upon the earth is like unto that of a night." Job 7, she says, from the Vulgate, from that translation. And during this meditation, he was once more rapt from his senses, and it seemed to him that he saw coming towards him a fair youth of manly bearing, who held in his hands the spurs which the other apparel which knights are accustomed to wear, and the other apparel which knights are accustomed to wear. And he drew near to this. It's interesting that the word, we're looking at knights, becoming a knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, in the dark night of the soul, N-I-G-H-T. In English, the word, if you're watching this in the subtitles, the word for a knight in armor, that serves a king, has a K in front of our word for night, N-I-G-H-T. Anyway, and he drew near to the servitor and clothed him in a coat of mail and said to him, O knight, hitherto thou hast been but a squire, but now it is God's will that thou be raised to knighthood. And the servitor gazed at his spurs and said with much amazement in his heart, Alas, my God, what has befallen me? What have I become? Must I indeed be a knight? I had far rather remain in peace. Then he said to the young man, Since it is God's will that I should be a knight, I had rather have won my spurs in battle, for this would have been more glorious. The young man turned away and began to laugh, and said to him, Have no fear, thou shalt have battles enough. He who would play a valiant part in the spiritual chivalry of God must endure more numerous and more dreadful combats than any which were encountered by the proud heroes of ancient days, in whom the world tells and sings the knightly deeds. It is not that God desires to free thee from thy burdens. He would only change them and make them far heavier than they have ever been. Then the servitor said, O Lord, show me my pains in advance, in order that I may know them. The Lord replied, No, it is better that thou know nothing, lest thou shouldest hesitate. But amongst the innumerable pains which thou wilt have to support, I will tell thee. The first is this: hitherto it is thou who hast scourged thyself with thine own hands. Thou didst cease when it seemed good to thee, and thou hadst compassion on thyself. Now I would take thee from thyself and cast thee without defense into the hands of strangers, who shall scourge thee. Thou shalt see the ruin of thy reputation. Thou shalt be an object of contempt to blinded men, and thou shalt suffer more from this than from the wounds made by the points of thy cross. All right, it's been an hour. It says, okay, when thou didst give thyself up to thy penances, thou wert exalted and admired. Now thou shalt be abased and annihilated. The second pain is this: although thou didst inflict on thyself many cruel tortures, still by God's grace there remain to thee a tender and loving disposition. It shall befall thee that there, where thou hadst thought to find a special and a faithful love, thou shalt find naught but unfaithfulness, great sufferings, and great griefs. Thy trials shall be so many that those men who have any love for thee shall suffer with thee by compassion. And then hopefully I go right back to that, the third pain. All right, I wish you so much love. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you being on this path. Here's me in the sunlight. Here's the little plant I was talking about that I was looking down and seeing. I can't see with the glare if you see it, that and that. All right, much love.